The Pollock twins story is one that leaves even the most skeptical minds unsettled. Imagine losing your two beloved daughters in a horrific car accident, only to have another set of twins years later. And those twins begin remembering details and experiences they should have no knowledge of. They recall specific toys they never played with, describe places they've never been, and bear birthmarks eerily resembling their deceased sister's injuries. Decades later, this case remains a mystery that scientists and skeptics alike have failed to fully explain. This is not a chilling work of fiction. It is the true and perplexing tale of the Pollock family. John Pollock was born in Bristol in 1920 and raised in the Church of England, but his religious journey was far from straightforward. After converting to Catholicism as a young man, he married Florence, who had been raised in the Salvation Army and later embraced Catholicism as well. Despite sharing a common faith, their beliefs were not entirely aligned. John held a strong fascination with reincarnation, a belief rooted in a novel he had read at the age of 9. Over the years, this fascination grew, and he prayed fervently for proof that reincarnation was real, even if it conflicted with his Catholic upbringing. Florence, however, was far more skeptical of such ideas and preferred to adhere to conventional religious teachings. By the 1960s, the couple had distanced themselves from the church, though John remained steadfast in his belief in reincarnation, a belief that would soon take center stage in their lives. The Pollocks had two daughters, Joanna, born in 1946, and Jacqueline, born 5 years later in 1951. The family had moved to Hexham, a quaint town in Northumberland, where the girls grew up inseparable. Joanna, the elder, naturally assumed a maternal role, often looking after Jacqueline, who seemed to enjoy the attention. Joanna had a flair for drama, regularly putting on plays, while Jacqueline eagerly followed along. The girls shared simple joys, like combing their father's hair, and were known for their kind and generous natures. However, Joanna harbored an unsettling habit of saying she would never grow up, a comment that would later gain haunting significance. Tragedy struck the family in 1957. Joanna, aged 11, and Jacqueline, aged 6, were walking to church with a friend when a car veered off the road and struck them. The driver, a woman suffering from mental health issues, had overdosed on pills in what appeared to be a suicide attempt. Witnesses described the horrifying scene, with the girls thrown violently into the air. Both died instantly. The loss devastated the Pollock family. Florence coped by trying to avoid dwelling on the tragedy, while John became consumed by grief. He claimed to have visions of the girls in heaven and even sensed their presence in specific rooms of the house. For John, their deaths seemed to answer his prayers for proof of reincarnation. But this belief caused significant tension in his marriage to Florence, who was less willing to entertain such ideas. Not long after the tragedy, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. John was convinced she would give birth to twins and believed wholeheartedly that their late daughters, Joanna and Jacqueline, would return through reincarnation. Florence dismissed these notions, and even the family doctor confidently stated she was carrying just one child. But on October 4th, 1958, Florence gave birth to twin girls, Gillian and Jennifer. What stood out immediately was Jennifer's birthmarks. She had a mark on her forehead resembling a scar Jacqueline had from an accident, as well as another birthmark on her waist that matched Jacqueline's exactly. As the twins grew older, they began to exhibit behaviors and knowledge that defied explanation. At just 3 years old, they were introduced to toys that had belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline. Remarkably, Gillian immediately identified Joanna's doll as her own, while Jennifer claimed Jacqueline's doll. What's more, the twins remembered that the toys had been Christmas gifts from Santa Claus, mirroring the original circumstances of their deceased sisters. In one particularly chilling incident, Florence overheard Gillian cradling Jennifer's head and saying, "The blood's coming out of your eyes. That's where the car hit you." This statement bore an uncanny resemblance to the injuries Jacqueline had sustained during the fatal accident. The twins also demonstrated inexplicable knowledge of places and events tied to Joanna and Jacqueline. On a visit to Hexham, where they had never lived, Gillian and Jennifer appeared to recognize landmarks. They pointed out a park and swings they had never played on, but which their deceased sisters had frequented. They even recalled details about school lunches, a specific experience that only Joanna and Jacqueline could have known. Beyond these memories, their personalities also reflected their older sisters. Gillian adopted a maternal role similar to Joanna's, while Jennifer was more passive, clinging to her sister in much the same way Jacqueline had. John Pollock, already a firm believer in reincarnation, saw these behaviors as undeniable evidence of his theory. In 1963, the family's case caught the attention of Dr. Ian Stevenson, a prominent researcher specializing in reincarnation. Stevenson conducted detailed interviews with the Pollocks, observed the twins, and meticulously documented his findings. Among the most compelling aspects of the case were the physical similarities between the twins and their deceased sisters. Despite being identical twins, Jennifer's birthmarks were strikingly similar to Jacqueline's scars, and their body types and mannerisms bore uncanny resemblances to Joanna and Jacqueline. The twins also exhibited an intense fear of cars, which seemed deeply ingrained. They were extremely cautious when crossing streets and often clung to each other at the sound of approaching vehicles, as if reliving the trauma of their sister's fatal accident. Even their handwriting patterns mirrored their sister's developmental stages. Jennifer, for instance, initially gripped her pencil in a fist-like manner, just as Jacqueline had before being corrected. Ian Stevenson later argued that the Pollock twins' case defied simple explanations rooted in genetics or environmental factors. This was especially significant given that Florence, the girls' mother, had no belief in reincarnation and was unlikely to encourage behaviors or statements supporting such an idea. For John Pollock, however, the twins seemed to embody the very proof of reincarnation that he had sought for years. He viewed their peculiar behaviors, birthmarks, and uncanny knowledge as divine answers to his prayers, a belief that not only shaped his worldview, but also gave meaning to a tragedy that could have otherwise destroyed his family. As the twins grew older, their eerie memories and behaviors began to fade. During their childhood, John was careful not to openly discuss their unusual remarks or his own deep conviction in reincarnation, likely to avoid influencing them further. By the time the twins reached their teenage years, they had no recollection of their early statements or the bizarre moments that had once captivated their parents. It wasn't until they were 13 that John even mentioned his belief in reincarnation to them. By that point, their childhood memories of what seemed like a past life had completely disappeared, leaving only a faint trace of their mysterious beginnings. Life for the twins carried on uneventfully, and both Gillian and Jennifer grew up to lead ordinary adult lives. When Ian Stevenson followed up with them in their 20s, they admitted they could no longer remember anything tied to their supposed past lives. While they accepted their parents' belief in reincarnation and the idea that they might be linked to their deceased sisters, their own stance on the matter was far more reserved. Gillian, in particular, leaned toward skepticism, though she couldn't entirely dismiss the strange occurrences of her early years. One oddity did resurface years later. In 1981, Gillian reported experiencing vivid mental images, what she called inner visions. These involved playing in a sandpit alongside her brothers and detailed memories of a house surrounded by gardens, orchards, and lawns. Her descriptions matched a property the Pollock family had lived in years earlier in Wickham. Strangely, Gillian had never visited Wickham herself, and the images seemed to align with memories that only Joanna, her deceased sister, could have known. Though fleeting, this episode reignited questions about whether remnants of Joanna's life still lingered within her. The Pollock twins' story has fascinated believers and skeptics alike. Ian Stevenson, renowned for his work on reincarnation, cited their case as one of the most compelling examples in his research. However, not everyone was convinced. Ian Wilson, a British author known for scrutinizing paranormal claims, included the Pollock twins in his critique of reincarnation studies. He argued that the evidence was weak, noting that the only witnesses to the twins' unusual statements were their parents, whose accounts could have been shaped by grief, wishful thinking, or subconscious bias. Wilson pointed out that the twins might have absorbed knowledge about their deceased sisters through family conversations, even if those discussions weren't intentional. Wilson also introduced the theory of maternal impression, a phenomenon where a mother's emotional state during pregnancy might influence her unborn child. He suggested that Florence, still grappling with the trauma of losing Joanna and Jacqueline, could have unknowingly passed down details of their lives to the twins. However, even Wilson admitted this theory had limitations, particularly when applied to other reincarnation cases where the alleged memories involved entirely unrelated families or distant locations. Adding to the skepticism, Richard Rockley, writing for Skeptic Report, proposed that John Pollock's staunch belief in reincarnation might have shaped the twins' behavior. He suggested that John's theories could have seeped into the household, influencing the twins directly or indirectly. Rockley also speculated that family members or friends could have inadvertently reinforced the idea by talking about the accident or recounting stories about Joanna and Jacqueline. In a more critical stance, Rockley even entertained the possibility that the parents had exaggerated the twins' statements or, in extreme cases, fabricated the entire phenomenon to cope with their grief. However, the skeptics faced one particularly stubborn detail: Jennifer's birthmarks. These markings closely resembled scars and injuries unique to Jacqueline, her deceased sister. This aspect of the case was difficult to dismiss, even for the most hardened critics. Jennifer's birthmarks were not random. They mirrored specific features, such as a scar on Jacqueline's forehead and a distinctive mark on her waist. Interestingly, this phenomenon was not unique to the Pollock twins. In his extensive research, Ian Stevenson documented 895 cases of alleged reincarnation, finding that in 35% of them, the subjects had birthmarks or physical traits corresponding to injuries or characteristics of the individual they were believed to reincarnate. John Pollock strongly rejected the idea that his beliefs could have influenced the case. When questioned by a journalist about whether his convictions might have shaped his perceptions, John argued that if he hadn't believed in reincarnation, he would have kept quiet about the twins' unusual behaviors. For him, this underscored the authenticity of the case, suggesting that it was the girl's actions and remarks, not his faith, that had brought the story to light. Ian Stevenson's studies on reincarnation included numerous cases involving twins. Among them, the Pollock twins stood out for their combination of striking physical traits, inexplicable knowledge, and peculiar behaviors. Stevenson also documented other notable cases, such as the monozygotic twins Indika and Kakshapa Ishwara, further adding to the body of evidence supporting reincarnation. Despite decades of scrutiny, the Pollock twins' story remains one of the most compelling and debated cases in the annals of reincarnation research. To this day, the Pollock twins' case is both a source of wonder and a challenge to scientific understanding. Whether you view it as proof of reincarnation, a remarkable coincidence, or a product of grief-stricken parents searching for meaning, the story continues to captivate and mystify. Is this evidence of life after death or simply a case of psychological projection? The truth may never be fully uncovered, leaving us to wonder, how much of the unknown are we yet to understand?